For this project, we're going to make a 2D puzzle game where we take a picture, we chop it up, and we use those pieces to allow the player to do a virtual puzzle and put the picture back together. All right, so I'm going to create a new Unity project. I'm just going to call it puzzle game. I'm going to set my project to 2D and click create. Once inside the project, I'm going to go ahead and import in the package for this game. So puzzle game assets, and bring all of these in. And so these pictures, once they come in, they're very large, they're very high quality. You're going to be able to pick which of these resources you want. And so we'll break up this picture into multiple pieces and allow the player to put those pieces back together. All right, so here in my scene, I'm going to go to UI image. All right. And we're going to use this as the basis to one of our pictures here. I'm going to create a folder for scripts. I'm going to create a new script called drag and drop. Make sure that gets into the scripts folder and open that up. So inside the script, I'm going to make some additional methods to go along with my start and update. I'm going to make a method called drag, and be careful that it doesn't grab this on mouse drag. That's not what we want. We want just one called drag. I'm going to make one called drop. These are public, by the way. I'm going to make another one. I'm going to call move back. And make one called snap. And snap's actually going to take some parameters here. So we're going to allow it to take a game object that we'll refer to as IMG for image, and another one called PH, and I'm going to explain that later when we get in there. And we're going to make a method called check match that will be a comparison of whether or not the player has placed the correct piece in the puzzle. I'm going to make another one called init card, just to initialize the card. This is going to also be a public method. And then we have our start and update. All right, so these are all the methods we'll be using. So let's come up to the top here and let's put in a private variable. I'm going to say private vector3, and this will be the original position. So the starting position of the piece. And when we're dragging, what we're going to do is we're going to allow a game object's transform position to be assigned the input of the mouse position. So the player is going to click and drag. When they drop, what we want to do is we actually want to check to see if it was a match, if it was placed in the proper area. So I'm going to call check match when the player drops. All right. If it's moved back, we're going to take the transform position of that piece and put it back to its original position. So this vector3 up here. Inside of snap, what we're going to do is we're going to take that image, whatever image is being fed in, and we're going to take its transform position, and we're going to assign it the new position, PH transform position. So PH short for place here. Right. So when check match is run, we're going to declare a game object called img for image, and that is the game object we're on. And I'm going to make a string called tag, and that will be the tag of my object. So each one of our image pieces is going to have its own unique tag. And so I'm going to say game object, call it ph1. We're going to say is equal to gameObject.find. We'll look for an object with a capital PH plus whatever tag number that particular piece is. I have a float called distance. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assign that a vector3 dot distance, where we take the position 1 and then the second parameter we're going to put in there is the image transform position. And so what this is going to do is we're going to say if our distance becomes less than or equal to, we'll say 50, then we're going to allow that piece to snap into position. I'm going to snap that image to place here 1. Otherwise, we want it to move back to that start original position. Okay, so this 50 value allows us to, or allows the player to not have to be a surgeon when trying to place that piece. They can get it pretty close and it'll snap into position if it's in the correct area. All right. This init card, I'm going to go ahead and change that to position, init card position, because what we're doing is we're going to take that original position and assign it transform.position. And in fact, start is going to do that as well. Original position is our transform position. With the script saved, coming back here to Unity, I'm going to take a copy of that drag and drop script. I'm going to attach it to that image object. I'm going to click on Add Component, and I'm going to type out the word event. And you can see there's event system. What we're looking at for this one is event trigger. I'm going to select the event trigger, and it's going to say add new type event. I'm going to click that, and when I do, I can see here's the different events available to me. I'm going to select drag from that window. Once I do, it's going to populate up this area where I can make a list of what happens when that event drag happens. So I'm going to click on this plus icon. It's going to say, okay, what target do we want? We want it to target itself. I'm going to drag and drop image right in there. All right, so it's targeting itself. I'm going to click this drop down, and now that it's looking at itself as a pointer to itself, I want to look at my drag and drop script that we made. So I'm going to go to drag and drop, specifically look at that drag method. So every time this event drag happens, we're going to be looking at that method called drag right here, where we take our input mouse positions. All right, so we're going to test this out. I'm going to press play. And what should happen now is as I click and hold on this white image, I can drag it anywhere. If I let go of it, it leaves it where it's at. That's the drop. Okay, so I'm going to stop play there, and I'm going to save this scene as game. So I'm going to save as, call it game. Make sure that gets into my scenes folder. All right, so we've got the start here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new UI image. I'm going to rename this new one capital PH with the number 1 after. And what this will do is it'll be the basis of all of our other game objects where we start tagging different pieces after that PH number. So we have PH1, we'll have others here. All right. So placeholder 1. And what we're going to do is change the color of this placeholder 1. I'm going to click on this color swatch and make it green. And I'm going to physically move that PH1 away. So I'm going to go here into my scene, go to my move tool, and move it off to the side so that we can see both these images. With the image object, make sure you have the correct object selected. With the image object selected, I'm going to click the Add New Event Type button in this Event Trigger section. I'm going to select End Drag. So by default, it's already targeting this image again. If it's not, you can verify that it is indeed targeting the correct image. And for our function dropdown, we're going to target that drag and drop. This time we're going to target the drop. Okay, so that's what happens when we end the drag. Okay, I'm going to create a new tag. Up here I'm going to click plus in this section, and I'm going to name this tag just the number 1. And I'm going to go back to my image and actually tag it as number 1. From there I'm going to take my PH1 object, do a Command D to duplicate it, and I'm going to rename this duplicate PH2. Make sure you're not putting any spaces after that or we'll get some undesired results. So PH2, I'm going to change that color to red. And I'm going to move that PH2 object to a different location. So now I can see all 3 of these objects. I'm going to restack my canvas here so that PH1 is at the top, PH2 is next, and image is the 3rd. So what we're going to do is we're going to play test this out. We're going to test out dragging and dropping the white image onto the green object. And as you can see, once I got close, it starts snapping. All right. Now, if I try to drop it anywhere else, it goes back to its original position, whether on the red, anywhere here. The only place it should be allowed to snap to is the green. All right, so if we have that, you're in good shape. I'm going to stop play. I'm going to save the scene. And what we're going to do now is start working on our picture pieces. So what I'm going to do is expand out the resources folder. I'm going to select all of these objects. And what we're going to do is, as a group, change them from a single to a multiple sprite. And I'm going to make sure that my pixels per unit is set at the correct amount, and that's 1000. Okay, so you should have 3 zeros after the 1. I'm going to click Apply. This might take a moment as it re-imports all of the images in the correct fashion. But once it's complete, I'm going to go back. I'm going to select this top object or sprite, and I'm going to click on this sprite editor button. So we have this asset open here. I'm going to click on this slice button, and I want to change the type from automatic to grid by cell count. Right? And what that's going to do is it's going to allow us to evenly chop this thing up. What we want are 5 columns and 5 rows. I'm going to click on slice, and when I do, you can see how the puzzle gets broken up here. So each one of these squares is going to become a piece in the puzzle. I'm going to come up here, I'm going to click apply. So once it's applied, I can close that window. I'm going to take a look here at this, and when I expand out that asset, I can see that it's now chopped up into individual sprite pieces. So I want you to come through and do that for all these pieces, and I'm going to stop the video here and pick up after all these pieces or all these sprites have been properly sliced up. Here we have all of the images chopped up. So I'm going to go to my image object. I'm going to rename that to piece. I'm going to create a folder called prefabs. I'm going to drag and drop piece into my prefabs folder. All right, I'm going to create a new tag, so I'm going to go back here. I can select any object and hit tag. I'm going to add a new tag called 2. Oops. 2, save. I'm going to go back to my piece object. I'm going to duplicate that piece object. I'm going to change its tag over to 2. I'm going to move this duplicate piece, actually I'm going to rename that duplicate piece to piece 2, and I'm going to move that to new location. So I should be able to see now all 4 of these pieces. All right, I'm going to go back to the original piece, and what we're going to do is we're going to choose an animal that we want the puzzle to be. And we're going to drag and drop that first sprite ending in _0 into this image slot. All right, so the first step we're going to do is we're going to need to figure out what animal we want to use of our collection. All right, so pick whichever one you want to use. I'll go with the tiger here. I'm going to expand out the tiger. And you can see, here's the name of it. I don't want to mess with any of that. I just want to focus in on these last numbers here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the one that ends in _0, and with my piece selected, I'm going to drag and drop that into its source image, so that this piece is now looking at just that one chopped up section of my overall picture. So it's targeting just this area right in here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select piece 2 now and put that _1 into its source image. And so your game should look something similar to this. If I press play, so my piece 1 snaps to the green but not the red. If it doesn't snap anywhere, it goes back to its original position. Now this alternate piece, piece 2 here, won't snap into the green, but it will snap into the red. And if it doesn't snap anywhere, it goes back to its original position. I'm going to stop play and save the scene. To keep the screen scaling correctly with these objects, what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the canvas, and over here under my canvas scaler UI scale mode, I'm going to change that to scale with screen size. And you'll see a slight shift in your game window. But what that'll allow us to do is size our screen up and down, and these objects will keep that same aspect ratio. Okay, I'm going to right click on my canvas, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say create empty. And I want to make sure that empty is zeroed out on its X, Y, and Z. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this right side, say, of screen, where I camel case each one of those first letters of those words. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move that to my position X of 200. And I'm going to duplicate that right side of screen object and rename that duplicate left side of screen. And that one will have a value on the position X of negative 200. I'm going to drag and drop my PH1 right here onto my prefabs portion right here, and I'm going to rename that in my prefabs as just PH. All right, so we're now able to create all the rest of the tags and pieces to start kind of building out this puzzle. So I'm going to go back to my add tags portion, and I'm going to create tags 3 all the way through 25. So we're going to have quite a bit of them here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to speed up this portion. All right, so here we have our tags numbered 1 through 25. So I'm going to deselect everything in my hierarchy. I'm going to create a new empty game object. I'm going to name this Game Manager. Make sure I zero out my Game Manager object. I'm going to create a new script of the same name. So I'm going to create script Game Manager. I'm going to put that Game Manager onto this Game Manager object. And you might notice the icon right here for Game Manager turns into this cogwheel. That's okay. That's just Unity is associating that icon with any script that's named Game Manager. So I'm going to attach a copy of that to my Game Manager object and open this up to edit. Now, this script, I'm going to want it to talk to a UI, so I'm going to say using uniengine.ui. We're going to add some variables here. I'm going to make a public image. I'll call this piece. I'll make a public image called placeholder. I'm going to make a private float, and this will be my placeholder width. Another private float for my placeholder height. All right, so we'll keep that there. I'm going to save the script, come back here to Unity, select my Game Manager. I can see those two public variables. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag and drop my prefab called piece into my piece slot. I'm going to drag and drop my PH prefab into the placeholder slot. So those will be the items that we are talking about, these prefabs that we made. All right, so what we're going to do, go back to our script, and now we can start coding this up. What I'm going to do, I'm going to push start down some. I'm going to make a public method called create placeholders. And so we're going to define our size. We're going to have our placeholder width. I'm going to assign that a value of 50. We'll have our placeholder height, which will also be 50. I'm going to make a whole number variable. I'm going to say NB rows for number of rows. So we're going to have 25 pieces. That's how we've chopped up our pictures. So 25 pieces spread out over a square picture means we're going to have 5 rows and 5 columns. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a for loop. So I'm going to say int I equals 0, and as long as I is less than 25, and we'll increment I each time we loop through. I'm going to say vector3 center position, and I'm going to create that as a new vector3. And now we're going to place that. So I'm going to say center position is equal to GameObject dot will find that object that we made called right side of screen. Again, make sure this is spelled and cased exactly as you have it here. If you want to make sure, you can copy the name from there and paste it in just to make sure. Specifically the transform position of that object. And so I'm going to, in each loop, I'm going to make a float called row and a float called column. And what we want to do is stack these pictures out in such a way where we take that value of I and we're going to use modulus 5, which takes a remainder. So if 5 can't divide evenly amongst I, then what we need to do is go into a column. So that will be my column is equal to I divided by 5. So this will build out our grid. So I'm going to say vector3, call it placeholder position. I'm going to assign that a new vector3. We take our center position dot x, and we're going to add to that my placeholder width, and we're going to multiply that by another set of parentheses where we take our row, we subtract out our number of rows and divide that by 2. That'll be our x position. For our y position, take our center position dot y, and we're going to subtract off our placeholder height, where we multiply that by, in parentheses, our column, subtract off our number of columns. I misspelled that. NB columns, divide by 2. That's our y position. And for our z, there's not going to be a change, so I'm just going to say center position dot z. So that will be that placeholder's position. What we're going to do is we're going to create an image. Call it placeholder. And what we're going to do is we're going to instantiate. So I'm going to instantiate a placeholder prefab at that pH position with a default rotation, quaternion dot identity. And it looks like these parentheses are probably redundant with the latest Unity, so I'll drop that and see what happens. All right, so we're going to assign each one of those a tag. So placeholder.tag, I'm going to say is equal to, I'm just going to put quotation marks, and what we're going to do is we're going to add to an empty string line. I'm going to say whatever I we're currently at plus 1, because we don't actually have a tag for 0. So if we're on our first iteration, I equals 0, but it will actually get the value of 1. Okay, and we're going to name that as well. So we're going to take a ph.name. I'm going to, we're going to assign that. I'm going to say capital PH plus, in parentheses, I plus 1. And finally, we're going to put it as a child of our canvas. So I'm going to say ph.transform dot set parent to a game object dot find. We're going to look for the canvas transform. That completes our create placeholders method. We're going to make one more method here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call this inside of start here. So create placeholders. And so that method will get called on the start. We're going to make one more method that will be called on the start. And I'll fill that in here. And the name of this method will be create pieces. So I'm going to make public void create pieces. All right, so I'm going to have my placeholder width defined here. It's 50. And I'll define my placeholder height as 50. I'll make the int for my number of rows equal to 5. I'll make another int variable for my number of columns, also equal to 5. I'm going to say in a for loop, declare int I is equal to 0, and as long as I is less than my total number of pieces, which would be 25 pieces in this puzzle, and we'll increment I each time this loop runs. So I'll make a vector3 center position and assign that a new vector3. Right, so from there I can start moving this around. So that's going to be each loop is going to be equal to a GameObject.find. And what we're going to be looking for on this one is left side of screen. So whereas the method that we wrote above looked for the right side of the screen, this one's going to be looking for the left side of the screen. So I'll make a float called row, a float called column, and we're going to take our row that is equal to my I modulus 5 again. So you're starting to see some similarities to the method above. So for this now, we'll place holder position going to be equal to the new vector3. We're going to feed it a center position dot x, add to that my placeholder width, and we're going to multiply all of that by another set of parentheses here. Kind of deleted one too many parentheses there. But inside these parentheses, we've got to take our row number, subtract total number of rows, and divide that by 2. So that's going to be our x. For our y, take our center position dot y. We're going to subtract off that my placeholder height. Multiply that by my column. Subtract off the number of columns. Divide by 2. And then for our z value, again, we're going to just take our center position dot z. All right. So just like before, now we'll create an image, call that ph, and that will be equal to instantiate. What we're going to create is a piece. We're going to create that at the placeholder position, the default rotation. So you're probably going to guess what's going to happen next based off of how we wrote this before. We're going to take our placeholder.tag, assign that an empty string, but append to that empty string whatever the value of I is plus 1. I'm going to name it, so placeholder.name. I'm going to assign that, in this case, not ph, but we're going to assign it the name piece. We're going to add to that, in parentheses, I plus 1. And finally, we're going to take our placeholder, transform, and what we're going to do is we're going to set the parent. We're going to look for a game object, game object.find. We're looking for canvas.transform. And then inside of start, we need to call that create pieces method. Now there's one other section inside of create pieces that we have to add in here. So you can see the similarities between these two methods, but inside of create pieces, what we're going to do is we're going to push this down a little bit. And what we want to do is we need to take our picture and let it know what our sprite's going to be. So I'm going to say sprite. And what we're going to do is create an array. An array can hold a number of different sprites. So I'm going to call this all sprites. All right. And so at this point, it just sits as empty. And now you need to decide which picture we want. I'm going to come back here to Unity real quick. And we're kind of playing around with this tiger. I am playing around with this tiger. You can choose whichever animal you want. What we need to do is we need to copy and paste the parent name inside of this resources folder, because we're going to need to look for that piece. All right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this once to highlight it. I'm going to do a Command C to copy it. All right. So I've copied this name, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that name to figure out which of these sprites we're trying to pull from. So I've copied that name. I'm going to come back in here, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign this array this method. It's called resources dot load all. And it's going to ask me what kind of resource do I want to load. In these greater than or less than, I'm going to tell it you're looking for a sprite. Now resources.loadAll, this is a special method that allows us to pull information from a folder called resources. So as long as you have a folder called resources, like this one here, you can pull information from there. Resources is Unity specific. It's a very powerful method. We can put any kind of assets in here. We can put game objects, we can put textures, we can put, in this case, sprites, and we can pull them by name. So we're saying go into that folder and load all of the sprites, and what we're going to do is inside of this parenthesis, I'm going to paste that name that I copied in there. And I actually have to put this inside a quotation mark. So I'm going to undo that real quick. I'm just going to put a quotation mark, paste it, and then in my quotation mark and end it with that closing parenthesis. All right, so we're loading up all the sprites that have that name in it. Now again, as you can see, they're all named that, but they have underscore a number after it. So I load all of those up, and remember this is inside of a for loop. So every time this thing loops together, we're loading up all of those sprites, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new sprite variable. I'm just going to call it S1, and that is going to be assigned that all sprites array specifically at that I number. And now I'm going to take my placeholder and we're going to get the component named image, specifically its sprite, and we're going to assign that the S1 sprite up there. And that will happen every single loop. So we load up all of our pieces that way. So let's see how this plays. I'm going to save this script. I'm going to return here to Unity. And what we're going to do is, I'm going to expand out my canvas here. I'm going to delete this PH1 and PH2 out of my hierarchy. I'm also going to delete this piece and piece 2 out of there. Okay, because we have our right side and left side of screen, and that's where we're going to be using as our positioning. I'm going to select my piece prefab here, and under its width and height, I'm going to set those values to 50. And I'm going to do that same thing for this PH prefab. Set its width and height to 50. And I'm going to press play. All right. So what's happened is it's pulled my whole image. It's built based off of my left side and right side of screen objects, these pictures. All right. And what we can do now is I can click and hold on one of these pieces and move it over and let it go, and you can see it'll snap back. But let's try a corner piece. Let's try this very first piece here. If I bring it and try to put it, say, in this corner, it snaps back. If I try to put it in this corner, it stays because that piece belongs there. And if I try to pull it back out, it'll go back to the original. But if I get relatively close to where that needs to be, it'll snap it into place. And that's true of all these pieces. If I try to put a piece in the wrong position, it goes back to over here. So this is working exactly how I want it to so far. Now the idea is, what I want to do is I want to load up the game, have the player see the finished picture for just a brief period of time so they know what it's supposed to look like, and then I want to shuffle these all around. I want to mix these things all up. What we're going to do next is we're going to build in the ability to shuffle all these pieces. So I'm going to stop play. I'm going to save my scene here. I'm going to go back to my game manager. And up at the top, we're going to add some variables. I'm going to make a private float. I'm going to call this timer. This will track how long I allow the player to see the finished pieces before I start shuffling them around. And then I'm going to make a private bool called cards shuffled. I'm going to set that to false. Right. So I'm going to scroll down, and just before start, I'm going to add a new method. I'm going to say void, call this shuffle pieces. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a whole number. This will be my number of rows. Assign that to 5. Take another whole number called columns, also equal to 5. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an array of integers, call this new array, and that is equal to a new set of integers, specifically 25 numbers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a for loop. So I'm going to say for, I'll say int I equals 0, and as long as I is less than 25, and what 25, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to increment I each time. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my new array at that I position, and I'm going to have it assigned to that same value in I. Now this might seem a little redundant, but what I'm going to do underneath that is I'm going to make a temporary integer. And what I'm going to do in this for loop is I'm going to say int t is equal to 0, as long as t is less than 25. And we're going to increment t each time. And this time I'm going to say my temp is equal to that new array at the t value. And I'm going to declare a new integer. I'm going to say int r is equal to a random dot range somewhere between, I'll say, t and 10. And my new array at that t value is going to be the same value of my new array at the r value. And finally, what we're going to do is we're going to say that new array at that r value is equal to that first variable temporary. That's the shuffle. And so what I'll do next is I'm going to make another for loop. I'll say int I equals 0, I less than 25, increment I. And now what we're going to do is be able to start filling those pieces. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say we have a float called row, have a float called column, and row is going to be equal to the new array at that I value, and we're going to take that, use our modulus by 5. That will give us the remainder on that piece. We'll do something similar to the column. That is our new array, again at that I value, and we're going to divide that by 5. Nope, forgot to put equals in here. Scroll up a little bit here. And so I'm going to take now my vector 3, call this center position. It's equal to a new vector 3. And so we're going to start seeing similar stuff that we've done before. So that's GameObject.find. What we're going to find is the shuffled pieces will be on the left side of screen. We'll grab the transform position. And now what we're going to do is we're going to swap around these pieces inside of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I'm just going to declare a variable called G, and that will be equal to a GameObject.find. What we're looking for in this case is an object called piece. And then that name piece is going to be added to the I+1. And we're going to set them to a new position. So vector 3, I'll call this new position. It's going to be equal to a new vector 3. We take our center position dot x. Again, we're going to add to it the placeholder dot width multiplied by our row minus our total number of rows divided by 2. And then for the y, so center position dot y, we're going to subtract off that the placeholder height. Going to multiply that by our column. That's our number of columns divided by 2. That will be our y position, and then for our z, center position dot z. Now that we have new position calculated here, we just need to take that particular piece. Again, this is in our for loop. So whatever piece we're focusing in on at that moment, we're going to take our temporary variable, which is g. We're going to take its transform position and assign it that new position that we just calculated right here. And then finally, that variable g, we're going to get the component, drag and drop. And what we're going to do is we're going to run from drag and drop the initialize card position. Okay, this will shuffle all of our pieces for us. And if you're getting an error here, it's because that needs to be a new vector 3 there. Okay, so I'll shuffle our pieces. Now we created a timer up here and then a card shuffled. And so again, we want the player to see that starting picture before shuffling around. So what I'm going to do is inside of update, I'm going to take my timer and I'm going to add to it the passage of time. So plus equals time dot delta time. And if, it's more like when, but if my timer becomes greater than or equal to, let's say 4, and my cards are not shuffled, so not cards shuffled, then what we're going to do is we're going to call this method we just wrote, shuffle pieces. So I'm going to say shuffle pieces, and at that point my cards are shuffled. Nope, equals true. Because it starts off as false. Okay, so I'm going to save it. I'm going to come back here and press play and see what happens. There's my tiger. I can see the picture. 4 seconds have passed, and they all get shuffled around. And again, if I try to put this piece in the wrong position, it doesn't like that. But if I take a piece that should be in the right position, it will lock it in there. If I try to move it off, it'll snap back over here. But again, I can go through now and I can start putting my puzzle of my animal together. And so if I want to remove a piece, again, I can do that sort of thing. It'll snap back. If I try to put a piece where it doesn't belong, it rejects it. It will only allow pieces into an area where they belong. So that's our finished puzzle game. We should be able to go through and finish this puzzle off, and everything should be going quite well. Now if we stop play and press play again, it'll show us that picture, and we can start grabbing these pieces for those first few seconds. But you'll see after 4 seconds it shuffles them around, it pulls them out of the puzzle that it was being built in and pushes them back. And each time the shuffle will move these pieces to somewhere new. So for example, in this upper right corner, the cat's eye is up here in the upper right. Cat's top of the head is the next piece right after it. If I press play, shuffles them around. The cat's eye is no longer here. Top of the head has been moved over here. So the shuffle takes effect each time, and it's looking pretty good. That's the end of our puzzle game.